Hey there, flooby scum. That's right, you're a flooby now. You want to know the 10 stages of genocide, flooby? Well, there's a guy named Gregory H. Stanton, probably a no-good flooby sympathizer, who runs an org called Genocide Watch. Sounds like a whole lot of fun. Sounds like a barrel of monkeys, man. And he's cataloged these 10 nifty stages of genocide. You want to know what they are? Here we go. First stage is classification. That's where you're assigned a label that separates you from other people. You got that, flooby? The second stage is symbolization, where negative stereotypes are attributed to you. You floobies are all a bunch of raping, murdering, evil, degenerate scumbags. The third stage is discrimination, where policies are implemented against you. What are you doing out here, flooby? You know floobies aren't allowed out after curfew. The fourth stage is dehumanization. This is where essentially the case is made that you aren't even really human, and thus violence against you, it's kind of justifiable. The fifth stage is organization, where violent groups form with the purpose of doing you harm. The sixth stage is polarization, where the voices of those that hate you are amplified and amplified and amplified, and your own voices kind of silenced. The seventh stage is preparation, where those that want you dead begin to put together the materials and logistics to, make it happen. The eighth step is persecution, where people like you are, raped, murdered, tormented, forcibly relocated, all that fun stuff. The ninth step is extermination. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's where you're rounded up and killed. Finally, every last stinking evil flooby is dead. The 10th step, of course, is denial. Flooby genocide? What flooby genocide? They were just here a minute ago. Oh, I don't know what happened to them. Whoops. Seem to have misplaced our floobies. If you thought it sucked to be a flooby in my hypothetical example a moment ago, then just imagine being a trans person in America right now. Because in 2021, 2022, and 2023, we have seen hundreds of anti-trans bills produced across the nation. Many of these bills have already been enacted into law. Almost all of these discriminatory bills came out of the Republican Party. Shocking, right? Florida is on the cusp of passing a version of Senate Bill 254, which Governor Puddingfingers will almost certainly sign into law. What does that bill do? Well, just allows the state to kidnap trans kids from their loving families and place them in a foster care system that is demonstrably rife with abuse. Normal stuff like that. In Missouri, State Attorney General Andre Bailey is putting rules into effect that essentially make it impossible for trans people of any age to get gender-affirming care. For example, if you have autism, anxiety, depression, no gender-affirming care for you, because there's no way that a person could have anxiety and gender dysphoria, right? Not only that, but this creepy-ass piece of work actually created a snitch line so that you could report any unauthorized trans people to the state. Now, luckily, the line was closed after being flooded with fake calls from freedom-loving patriots. These legal atrocities coincide with increasingly vile rhetoric from the American right-wing media and Republican politicians. Trans people have been routinely labeled as groomers in right-wing circles, carrying on the well-documented tradition of othering and demonizing queer people on the basis of them being predators and sexual deviants. Meanwhile, conservative influencers like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh have flagrantly advocated for the eradication of trans people, cloaking it in dishonest terms so as to create enough reasonable doubt to swindle stupid people into believing that they're not openly pushing a genocidal agenda. But many in their audience understand the dog whistles, see the true message, and have embraced the genocide, as evidenced by a casual reading of either of their comment sections. Former President Donald Trump, in a deranged campaign speech, I struggled when I was writing this out whether I should put the word deranged in front of campaign speech, because of course there is no other kind of Donald Trump campaign speech But in his campaign speech, which, yes, was absolutely fucking goddamn deranged, he labeled gender-affirming care as mutilation, continued to spread the false notion of minors receiving gender-affirming surgery, and called receiving puberty blockers mutation. Like, mutation. Like they're the X-Men now. Why am I even wasting my breath right now, though, you know? Because no matter what you say to these transphobes, it just goes in one ear and out their ass. They're going to respond with the same garbage tautologies and brain-dead statements that they always spew. Men are men, women are women, only two genders. Transgender is mental illness, gender ideology, social contagion, cultural Marxism, blah, 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 blah. No fucking arguments. No reasoning, just fucking statements. Just, I declare it to be so, therefore it is. Every one of them thinks they're God. So why should I bother reiterating the fact that minors undergo extensive psychiatric evaluation before even being considered for puberty blockers, which are often the sole treatment given until the minor is old enough to decide whether or not to proceed with hormone therapy? Why should I even emphasize that puberty blockers have almost entirely reversible effects once discontinued, and that no minor has ever been considered for genital reconstructive surgery except for in very extreme, very fucking rare situations? Unlike, by the way, the barbaric and commonly practiced surgical procedure of altering the genitalia of intersex children to fit the narrow sex binary. The Republican Party has made it absolutely, astonishingly clear that the well-being of children with gender dysphoria holds absolutely no goddamn importance to them. They will disregard factual evidence. They will disregard science. They will disregard empiricism. None of that factors into their political decision-making. The Republican Party has selected their scapegoat of the moment, and it's trans folks. And no amount of argumentation, no amount of evidence will dissuade them from their course. Now, I have thus far, in an act of stunning charitability, refrained from directly comparing Republicans to Nazis. This is partially for fear of alienating those of you who might find such an analogy to be grossly, perhaps even irresponsibly, hyperbolic. But let me ask you this. If you find that analogy to be an overstatement, can you come up with a more fitting one? Throughout history, where else can we identify a political party that is as anti-democratic, pro-police state, reactionary, nationalistic, xenophobic, white supremacist, and anti-degenerate as the Republican Party? Because I can only think of one, and it spoke German, motherfucker! And just like the Nazis, the Republicans want to utilize democratic institutions to install a totalitarian leader who they hope will dismantle democracy and purge this nation of the undesirables. The January 6th insurrection could easily be likened to the beer hall putsch, in which Adolf Hitler and the other Nazi party leaders attempted to overthrow the Bavarian government in 1923. The coup failed, and Hitler was arrested and imprisoned, but this did not prevent the Nazi Party from exploiting the political and economic instability of the Weimar Republic to gain power through democratic means. And after using democracy to gain power, they dismantled democracy and instituted a totalitarian regime that caused more suffering and more misery than any other regime in the history of the world so far. Trump and the Republican Party have branded the media enemies of the people, a Nazi tactic. They have increased their censorship of literature, seeking to suppress any materials that challenge their narrow-minded values, similar to the Nazi practice of book burning. The Republican Party bears a striking resemblance to many of the 14 features of fascism identified by Umberto Eco, such as cult of tradition, rejection of modernism, fear of difference, appeal to social frustration, obsession with plot, selective populism, etc. The only difference is that what was once called Jewish science is now called woke. And cultural Bolshevism has been replaced with cultural Marxism. In light of these facts, I fear a trans genocide. And if you feel inclined to quibble with me over the semantics of the word genocide, I'd invite you to go fuck yourself. Because, of course, it's difficult to say definitively when a genocide can officially be deemed as such. Technically, even by the metric of the stages that Stanton outlined, the genocide really only begins at the late phase of extermination. That's why it's so important to make clear that there are parallels between the early phases preceding the mass killings of history with the current mistreatment of and discrimination against trans people we see in our modern day. These trends strongly indicate the genocidal intent of the Republican Party and American conservatives in general on a broader scale. If these trends continue, it is hardly inconceivable that trans people will be subjected to the same mass execution that past victims of genocide were acquainted with. At the very least, they may be forced to live inauthentic lives, deprived of that most sacred of American rights, the pursuit of happiness. But the threat posed by the American right is not limited to trans people. Republicans, in my view, represent a terrifying existential threat to humanity itself. The United States, with its highly disproportionate power over the world economy, titanically bloated military, and massive influence on the world stage, has more power and resources than Weimar Germany ever could have imagined. So if we trod the same path as the Germans did and allow Nazis to seize control of the entirety of the state, then World War II may seem like a mere skirmish in comparison to what ensues. With the nuclear threats we face from China and Russia, World War III may spell the end of humankind. This is all before you even take into account the doom spelled by climate change, which Republicans not only deny, but escalate with their wanton deregulations of the oil and coal industries. We shall never have any hope for freedom and prosperity as long as the cancer of fascism is allowed to fester in the malignant womb of the Republican Party. And what of the opposition? What of the Democrats? Maybe they'll help us, right? The unfortunate truth is that the Democrats will continue to exploit the subjugation of trans people as an opportunity to dredge up more votes for themselves, only to take no serious or even baseline effectual measures to oppose the erosion of trans rights, or anyone else's rights, for that matter. Well, excuse me if that seems wholly inadequate. If I'm being stabbed, the guy who watches and shrugs and says, hey, at least I'm not the one stabbing you, doesn't seem particularly fucking useful, does he? The regression of civil rights in America is completely irrelevant to the bottom line of business interests. That's why corporations like Disney are perfectly willing to pay lip service and shill merchandise to queer people, and then proceed to fund Republican politicians who are actively at war with LGBT people. And since these same soulless business interests are the puppet masters that pull the strings of both parties, neither one will meaningfully take any action that could threaten the status quo of big business. They are, however, perfectly willing to toss your rights around like a cheap political football because you mean nothing to them outside of being a participant in the illusion of choice this country presents at the ballot box, a meaningless pageant brought to you by, drumroll, the corporate fucking elite. Let me be clear. I don't blame anyone for voting for Democrats, for Democratic candidates, wherever they're running, for whatever office, just for the sole purpose of delaying the ascent of the Republican Party. I don't blame you. I do it myself. However, it is important that you do not expect any substantive change from this neoliberal charade. Real change is going to cost you a fuck of a lot more than just a trip to the polls. You're going to have to get your hands a little bit dirtier than that. Maybe it's not my place to say, but I would also caution trans people. Don't fall for the panderings of this consumer culture. Don't be taken in by the syrupy, venom-soaked promises of the dark god economos. Do not think of victory as merely becoming another demographic for the wealthy to hawk products at, because that would be the death of your movement, just like it's been the death of every movement in this country. And that's why pride is and must remain a protest. Until we live in a just and equitable society, we can't forget that. I've seen people like Vosh suggest that, we tone down the protest elements of pride to maintain relevancy as society progresses. And look, I love Vosh. But what he fails to realize is that the supposed progress American society has made towards the advancement of LGBTQ rights is incredibly selective, particularly as it pertains to geography. We have not made the progress we think we have. The fight rages on. Now, for the rest of this video, I wish to speak directly to the trans people in the audience. If you're not trans, you can feel free to leave at this point, or you can stay. Either way. But if you're trans, I want you to know that your persecution and subjugation is a terrible affliction, and it is completely un-American. The people responsible for it should be run into the fucking ocean as far as I'm concerned, because no community should ever have to endure what you are right now. For the egregious sin of pursuing your own happiness, you have been demonized, outcasted, assaulted, lied about by heartless pigs, by sociopathic, fuck-faced little worms. Despite this, you do not have to live as a victim. You do not have to inhabit a victim mentality, because let's remember, you're not something new. You're not a development of modern social justice propaganda. Throughout history, we see examples of trans people bravely holding true to their identity, standing against the world when necessary. Marsha P. Johnson was a black transgender woman, an LGBTQ plus rights activist who played a pivotal role in the Stonewall riots. Christine Jorgensen was an American trans woman who became widely known in the 1950s for undergoing sex reassignment surgery and hormone therapy at a time when such procedures were extremely rare. Dr. James Berry was a trans man who performed the first successful cesarean section in Africa and made significant contributions to improving the health of British troops stationed in Cape Town. Wendy Carlos is a trans woman and American composer who is known for her groundbreaking albums and film scores, including the soundtrack for Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. Alan L. Hart was an American physician and researcher, best known for his pioneering work on tuberculosis and for being one of the first transgender men to undergo hormone therapy and gender-affirming surgery. The Wachowski sisters are a pair of American filmmakers who are known for their groundbreaking work in cinema, including the creation of The Matrix. The contributions of these individuals and many more highlight the important role that trans people have played in shaping culture and science, despite facing significant discrimination and marginalization from this fucked up society. Sadly, the history of trans people has often been erased and ignored by mainstream society, leaving many feeling invisible and powerless. So I suggest you empower yourselves by seeing what trans people have accomplished, even in the face of societal resentment and resistance. And if you're one of the many people that are hurting right now in the face of this recent wave of anti-trans persecution, I would like to close by providing you with some resources and advice that could help you. Below in the description is going to be a link to a legislative risk map by Aaron Reed. Here you will see which American states are hellholes at risk or are safe havens. I strongly recommend that any trans person wishing to preserve their safety make some sort of plan to escape to one of these safe states. I also strongly encourage you to purchase firearms if you believe you are mentally sound enough to possess them, as they may, become necessary tools to preserve your life. Practice good gun safety and train to use your firearms properly. Comply to the best of your ability with local laws in your area, but keep in mind you have a right to self-defense that goes beyond what any local law of your state might say. I strongly recommend you also keep your passports up to date. Smartly budget your finances in case of emergencies. If you wish to reach out to other trans people and currently lack the means to do so, please consider phoning the Trans Lifeline. It's a nonprofit organization that offers crisis intervention and peer support services to transgender and other gender nonconforming individuals in the U.S. and Canada. They operate a 24/7 hotline staffed by trans volunteers who are trained in active listening and suicide prevention. The organization also provides micro grants and other support services for trans people. There's also other resources such as PLUME and Planned Parenthood, which provide services for gender-affirming care and are available in many states. And before I go, I want to thank 3 trans women, Blair Witch and Ashley Rose, who helped with the research and structuring of this video, and also my editor, Emily, who put together a comprehensive series of supporting resources and research that you can see featured down below in the description section of this video. I'm the Amazing Atheist. Peace the fuck out.